The entire Galactic Council laughed when they saw the human step into the arena. He was shorter than most warriors, wore no shining armor, and carried no advanced alien weapon. "Is this really Earth's greatest fighter?" one alien general mocked. The crowd erupted with laughter. But the human didn't react. He simply looked at his opponents and smiled. None of them understood what that smile meant, because on Earth, the most dangerous humans were never the loudest. They were the calm ones. They declared humans extinct. 100 years later, we returned. The vote took 11 seconds. In the Hall of Accord, under a ceiling painted with the victories of older species, 9 ruling delegates raised their hands and erased a people from law, from maps, from history, with the casual precision of bureaucrats who thought time had already done the killing for them. The sole preservation order was dissolved. Human territory, abandoned assets, orbital ruins, cultural remains, and all remaining claim markers were opened for reclamation by licensed members of the Concord. Around the chamber, diplomats murmured with relieved satisfaction. A dead species no longer needed a memorial. A dead species did not need a seat. Only the empty chair remained. It stood at the lower ring of the assembly floor, black-backed and dustless, as if someone still polished it in secret. The brass seal of Earth had long since been stripped away, but the outline was still there if the light hit it right. No one looked at it for long. The old records said humanity had perished during the burning century, when the outer wars collapsed half the gate network and swallowed Sol behind storms of fire. The official lesson was simple. Humans were brave, unruly, useful in battle, and then gone. The galaxy grieved. The galaxy moved on. That was the lie that kept empires comfortable. Because what the Concord never admitted, not even to its own younger worlds, was that humanity had not died alone. A century earlier, when the ash-wake swarms poured through the Perseus lanes and entire civilizations fled inward screaming for protection, it was the human fleet that held the line at the Helios choke for 19 straight months. It was human carriers that burned first. Human stations that detonated themselves to seal breaches. Human ground regiments that fought on airless moons after every sensible species had already withdrawn. The Concord promised reinforcements. It promised mutual defense. It promised that Sol would never stand alone. Then the core worlds did the arithmetic. Saving Earth would cost too much. Saving humanity would bleed too many ships. So the high chambers sealed the inward gates, preserved the inner hegemony, and told themselves the decision was tragic, necessary, civilized. The last human ambassador pounded both fists on the Senate floor until bone cracked, and demanded the fleet they had been promised. No fleet came. 3 weeks later, Sol vanished behind warfire, and the Concord declared the matter closed. When no ships emerged from the ruins, extinction became policy. Policy became memory. Memory became myth. For 100 years, the grave was profitable. Salvage cartels picked at the edges of the system. Museums filled with human flags, medals, flight jackets, children's books, wedding bands dug from burned habitats, and sold under glass to species who called it remembrance. Officers toasted the noble dead over imported Terran whiskey grown from recovered seed stock. Human tactics were studied in war colleges by admirals who never mentioned where those tactics had been bought. Sol was a wound turned into a marketplace, and no one in power expected the wound to answer back. The thing that crossed the line happened in silence beneath the surface of Luna. Prefect Rule of the Meridian Extraction Authority had won the first major concession after the vote. His cutters drilled into a forbidden vault under the old South Polar ice, expecting precious metals, military archives, maybe preserved reactor cores. What they found instead were cryogenic chambers stacked in cathedral rows, each one fogged with the breath of sleepers who had outlasted an empire's memory. There were just over 11,000 of them, shielded by dead reactors and ancient failsafes. Civilians hidden in the last days before Earth burned. Children, medical staff, teachers, embassy families. The final reserve of a species that had been condemned and forgotten. One chamber woke before the others. A human officer, weak and frost-burned, dragged himself halfway upright and demanded identification in a voice ruined by sleep. When Rule gave his title, the man asked for the Saul Treaty Registry, then for emergency aid, then for diplomatic authentication in the name of the United Nations of Earth. He still believed the treaty meant something. He still believed the Concord would honor first contact protection for survivors of a member civilization. Rule recorded the exchange, smiled for the camera, and ordered the vault sealed. The official report said a reactor collapse destroyed an unstable ruin. The truth was uglier. Meridian Security vented half the chambers to preserve biological assets, then loaded the strongest survivors into black transports marked for private research contracts in the inner worlds. The waking officer kept trying to speak over the alarms, kept repeating that this was sovereign human territory, kept saying there were children in the lower rows. Rule shot him through the throat when the translator started carrying the words too clearly. Then he burned the dock and buried the evidence beneath melted stone. He missed one thing. As the chamber died, an emergency beacon older than the Concorde itself crawled awake in the dark and pushed a distress packet through obsolete frequencies no modern navy still monitored. It carried less than a minute of corrupted video, flashing red lights, cryofrost on small faces, Rule's insignia, a human voice choking on blood as it forced out a final authentication code from a dead civilization. The signal vanished into the black between stars. Far beyond mapped lanes, beyond the last commercial relay and the last military picket, in cold systems the Concorde had never bothered to name, machines hidden inside comets caught that dying packet and passed it hand to hand through a chain of dark stations. No fanfare marked the moment. No alarms rang in crowded control rooms. In the shipyards of the drift colonies, welders stopped because their displays went red at the same instant. On hollowed asteroid farms, school children were quietly led out of class. At fleet anchorages buried in the magnetospheres of rogue worlds, old officers received sealed notices and said nothing for a very long time. Then humanity moved. Not loudly, not with speeches, not with threats broadcast for effect. The first sign was that relay stations along the old Perseus frontier began going blind. Crews woke to find their navigation cores wiped and their command decks emptied. A pirate flotilla that had preyed on refugee traffic disappeared between one jump and the next. Its escape pods were later recovered adrift in perfect formation, stocked with food, water, and medical kits, every crewman alive, every weapon disabled, every captain gone. At a Concorde fuel depot above Ilir, security footage showed nothing at all until the exact moment the depot's reactors shut down and the station surrendered to an unseen boarding party that took only munitions and encrypted archives. Worlds whispered about revenants. Admirals said smugglers. The markets said war before the Senate dared say it aloud. Then the dead arrived where everyone could see them. They came above Earth. The Concorde had staged a ceremony in high orbit over the old world, equal parts triumph and theater, to mark the opening of Sol for reclamation. Delegates floated behind armored glass and watched drones sweep over continents still scarred by orbital fire. Below them, Earth turned slowly, blue and bruised and unbearably beautiful. The speeches had already begun when the stars behind the moon changed. At first, it looked like a fault in the observation shield, a distortion too crisp to be natural. Then, black hulls slid out of the dark, one by one, not from jump points, but from the deep shadow of lunar orbit, where they had apparently been waiting inside the thermal noise of wreckage fields. They were not improvised survivor craft. They were warships. Long, angular, matte as cooled ash, with no ceremonial paint and no visible insignia except a small white planet stamped near the bow, as if identity required no decoration. There were 12 of them in the first line, and dozens more behind. No one in orbit breathed. The lead ship opened a channel on every civilian and military frequency at once. A woman's voice spoke in clear, conquered standard, low and calm enough to make half the room colder. This system is under human protection. All unauthorized vessels will depart immediately. Prefect rule of Meridian Extraction Authority will be surrendered alive. All detained human survivors will be released within 12 hours. All sealed records concerning the fall of Sol will be transmitted intact. This is your only warning. For 3 full seconds, the galaxy forgot how to answer. Then, Admiral Teskar of the Third Armada laughed into an open mic and ordered targeting solutions. He had 6 times their visible tonnage, fortress escorts at his flanks, and the confidence of every officer who had spent a lifetime studying humanity as a dead subject. His first volley lit orbital night bright enough to turn Earth's oceans white. Missiles, lances, smart kill clouds, all of it hurled at the black line near the moon. The human formation did not scatter. It tightened. What happened next was shown in war academies for the next 50 years. The humans had seeded the orbital debris field with reflective dust and dormant mass drivers days before they revealed themselves. When Teskar fired, the entire wreck belt around Earth came alive. Kinetic needles accelerated from 1,000 silent positions and punched through the Armada's forward screens before its defense grid understood it was under attack from its own flanks. Human ships rolled through the chaos like blades through rain, using the debris storm as cover, never wasting a shot. Every strike had a purpose. Engines, fire control, communications, docking spines. Not a single civilian section was touched. Not one escape pod was targeted. 8 minutes after the first volley, the Third Armada had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Teskar's flagship was left drifting, cut open from prow to stern with such surgical precision that the command deck remained pressurized, while the bridge crew stared through a glowing seam into space. The humans still did not finish them. They transmitted evacuation coordinates, jammed every heavy weapon in orbit, and waited. That mercy should have saved the Concorde from the next disaster. Instead, it insulted them. Triarch Varos, first voice of the inner hegemony, declared the returning fleet illegitimate, piratical, and biologically suspect. He called them not survivors, but contaminants wearing human bones. He invoked emergency authority and ordered all worlds under Concorde law to detain ancestral human derivatives, associated relic cults, and undocumented genetic carriers, pending investigation. It was fear dressed as doctrine. On station after station, mixed-blood families were dragged from apartments because a grandparent had once come from a Terran colony. Museum curators turned over preserved DNA archives. Boarding schools locked down children with old Earth surnames. The state that had already abandoned humanity once now put its hands on the remnants it had spent a century collecting. That was the second mistake. Across 37 systems, detention sites failed on the same night. Doors opened. Power grids died. Security drones turned their guns into walls and then shut themselves down. At Black Reef Penitentiary, the guards found every cell empty except the warden's. He was still inside, hands zip-tied behind his back, sitting under a projector that played Rule's Luna footage on loop to anyone who entered. At Naro's port, an entire transport convoy carrying seized human derivatives vanished under escort, and the escort captains later swore there had been no battle at all, only a pulse through their ship that froze every system for 20 seconds. When power returned, their prisoners were gone, and their ammunition lockers were full of folded paper cranes made from copies of the Concord detention order. Then the evidence began to spread faster than censorship. The returning humans did what the Concord had never expected from prey. They opened the archive. First came the Luna footage, raw and unedited. Rule's face clear in 3 angles as he overrode life support on a chamber full of children who had slept through a century of darkness only to wake into murder. Then came the emergency sessions from the old Senate, long buried under state seal, showing exactly how Saul had been weighed and abandoned during the Ashwake War. Fleet timetables, vote counts, internal memos cold enough to make the blood thin. One line from a minister of finance broke the public mood all by itself. If humanity collapses at Helios, the inner worlds gained 31 months to prepare. This is acceptable. Acceptable. Worlds that had worshipped the Concord's permanence felt something crack under their feet. Provincial governors demanded investigations. Vassal states froze taxes. Veterans from a dozen species came forward to testify that human fleets had indeed held gates long after relief had been canceled. The old story began to die. In its place rose something far more dangerous to power than fear. Shame. Varos answered shame the only way failing empires do. He ordered total mobilization. The Grand Spear Fleet assembled at Cinder Gate, the largest concentration of Concord firepower since the Burning Century. More than 400 warships, carrier groups from the Inner Ring, siege barges, troop arcs, planetary assault platforms, and 3 cathedral-sized command halls armored for system-level bombardment. The plan was simple. Break the human line at the frontier, push into the dark systems where they had hidden, and annihilate them before rebellion spread. State media called it restoration. The admirals called it necessity. The crews whispered other words when officers were not listening, because the humans were waiting at Cinder Gate too, only not where the Concord expected. Varos had assumed the returning fleet was a spear point, a dramatic but limited force built on secrecy and terror. What emerged from the brown dwarf storms around Cinder was something else entirely. Human warships rose in layers from the radiation belts, from mined ice rings, from the shadow of dead moons, from places military doctrine said fleets could not survive long enough to hide. There were not dozens. There were hundreds. Carrier schools, arsenal ships, drone tenders, missile lances kilometers long, black hospital craft marked with bright white crescents, drifting just behind the line, as if even here they planned for the wounded before the shooting started. And then, the gate behind the Concorde Armada died. Human engineers had spent years infiltrating maintenance codes embedded in the old network, many of them originally written by Terran contractors before Sol fell. At the exact moment the Spear fleet committed its mass to the corridor, synchronization collapsed across 3 linked nodes. Reinforcement routes slammed shut. Retreat vectors scrambled. The vast Concorde formation, built for overwhelming frontal dominance, found itself split into disconnected pockets, with false telemetry flooding every command deck. Human jamming did not blind them completely. It did something worse. It let them see enough to panic. The battle lasted 9 hours, not because the Concorde fought brilliantly, but because the humans refused to waste lives in a slaughter they did not need. They isolated command ships first, fuel second, long-range coordination third. Marine actions punched straight through flag bridges, while precision fire erased every attempt to regroup. One inner ring admiral tried to ram the human center and discovered the center was bait. His whole strike wing ran into a mine lattice hidden inside the magnetic wake of the dwarf star. Another ordered civilian freighters used as shields and watched the humans halt fire entirely, pivot, and board him through the engineering hull instead. By the 6th hour, entire Concorde squadrons were shutting down weapons and broadcasting surrender codes without waiting for permission. By the 9th, the Grand Spear fleet was no longer an instrument of policy. It was debris, prisoners, and drifting metal. That should have ended it. Veros still had one card left, and he was the kind of ruler who mistook mass murder for leverage. Deep under the capital world of Aurelian Prime, the Concorde activated the Crown of Silence, an old strategic platform built during the last existential war and hidden from all but the highest chamber. It was not a planet killer in the crude sense. It was worse. A gravitic shear array capable of collapsing biospheres by wrecking orbital stability and boiling atmosphere over time. Slow enough to be called measured, absolute enough to be called final. Veros pointed it at Earth. The message he sent was elegant, which somehow made it fouler. Withdraw from all occupied Concorde space. Surrender your fleet for inspection. Submit leadership for war crimes review. In exchange, the cradle world of your species will be spared. Refuse, and the sentence delayed a century will be completed. A lesser people might have raged. A panicked people might have struck blindly. Humanity answered with 30 seconds of silence. Then, every screen in the Capitol switched to a live feed from inside the Crown's control chamber. No one knew how the humans got there. Some said they had inserted a team through maintenance shafts mapped from antique construction records. Some said they had been inside for days, waiting. The footage showed only this: black-armored human marines standing motionless among dead consoles and stunned operators, rifles low. Not one unnecessary shot fired. At the center of the room, a human commander held up the gravitic key in one gloved hand, while the chamber's chief technician knelt beside him, breathing hard, alive, and very aware that he had been spared on purpose. The commander looked into the camera. "You pointed a state weapon at our home," he said. "Now you get to watch us decide whether yours deserves to survive." Then the feed cut. Panic hit Aurelian Prime harder than any bombardment. Traffic grids locked. Financial nets crashed as high officials tried to flee with data vaults and found their routes sealed. Defense satellites rotated helplessly in orbit with their fire control loops frozen by human intrusion packages written with grim irony on architecture derived from old Terran Alliance software. For the first time in 200 years, the capital understood vulnerability. Not abstractly, not as something that happened to frontier colonies and inconvenient allies. Directly, physically, in the chest. The Senate called for negotiations. The humans accepted, which frightened everyone more. They did not arrive as supplicants or conquerors hungry for spectacle. A single shuttle crossed the defense perimeter and landed on the Hall of Accord's central platform, where a century earlier the last human ambassador had begged for aid. Out stepped 3 people. No honor guard, no visible panic. At their center was Secretary Mara Vance, commander of the Sol Return Fleet, wearing a dark uniform with no medals except one scorched strip of fabric pinned above her heart. It had once been part of the old Earth flag recovered from the ruins of the Helios defense ring. Inside the chamber, the delegates who remained tried to sit tall. Mara Vance did not bother with ceremony. She laid a data prism on the floor between them and activated it. The room filled with the image of Ambassador Naomi Hale from 100 years before, bruised, exhausted, standing in the same chamber under emergency session lights. The recording had been hidden in private archives and locked under treason seals. Hale's voice shook only once, when she named the worlds that would die if Sol fell. Then she straightened and looked directly at the delegates who had chosen to sacrifice her people. "If you abandon us," she said, "you will not merely kill an ally. You will teach the galaxy that your word means nothing when fear becomes expensive." No one in the hall moved. The recording continued past the point public history had always stopped. It showed the delegates voting. It showed relief assets rerouted away from Sol. It showed Naomi Hale removed from the chamber by security while still demanding that the official minutes include every name. And then, in the final hidden segment, it showed something the Concord had erased even from rumor. They killed her. Not publicly, not with drama.
In a side corridor under emergency security law, the ambassador of humanity was executed for incitement against wartime continuity, because she would not stop transmitting the truth to anyone who would listen. Her body was burned before Sol even fell. The order carried the ancestors' signatures of half the ruling lines still sitting in power. When the projection ended, the silence was so complete it seemed to drag at the air. Varos broke first. He lunged for the panic switch beneath his lectern. He never touched it. The polished ring of the chamber exploded inward as hidden defense shutters slammed down, not to trap the humans, but to seal the delegates inside. Outside, across the capital, human operations already in place moved on cue. Orbital shipyards lost gravity. Military command towers went black. Armories deadlocked. Treasury vaults opened and dumped their secret war funds into public audit channels. Citizens looked up to see human carriers hanging above their world like carved pieces of midnight. Every gun trained not on population centers, but on ministries, bunkers, and fleet moorings. It was the cleanest decapitation of a regime the galaxy had ever seen. Still, they did not fire on civilians. That was when the fear changed shape. Until then, many still believed humanity had come back for revenge in the simplest sense, that they would answer betrayal with indiscriminate ruin and prove every old prejudice correct. But the humans were more terrible than that. They wanted witnesses. They wanted precision. They wanted every species in the galaxy to see exactly who had betrayed whom, and exactly how measured justice could be when delivered by the people most entitled to fury. Varos was dragged before a public tribunal made not of conquerors, but of representatives from worlds the Concord had lied to for generations. Veterans testified. Survivors from Luna testified. Even Meridian laborers testified against Rule, who had been taken alive exactly as ordered, pulled from a hidden estate where he had been preparing to flee under another name. The humans submitted their evidence, stated their claims, and demanded three things only: recognition of human sovereignty over Sol and all recovered colonies, immediate release of all detainees seized under extinction law, and full disclosure of every sealed war archive concerning the fall of their home system. They did not ask for the Concord's throne. They didn't want it. That frightened the old powers most of all, because conquest they understood. Conquest could be resisted, negotiated, inherited, but a force that could shatter their fleets, expose their crimes, refuse their institutions, and still walk away from easy domination was something harder to contain. It meant humanity had not returned to join the galaxy as it was. Humanity had returned to redefine the terms under which the galaxy would be allowed to exist beside them. The settlements came quickly after that, because there was no fleet left to delay them. Vassal states recognized Sol within days. Border worlds, once treated as expendable, petitioned for defensive pacts with the new human coalition. Museums emptied their stolen relics into convoy ships bound for Earth. Names erased from stone were carved back in. On Luna, the cryovault dead were recovered, one chamber at a time, and carried into the light under military escort, so no one, ever again, could call what happened there an accident. And at the center of all of it, Earth remained. Scarred, half-recovered, oceans still bearing the chemical bruises of old war. Continents marked by glass deserts where cities had once stood, but alive. Human ships filled the sky above it in watchful layers. Construction rings bloomed where graveyards had drifted. Children born in the dark colonies set foot on ancestral soil for the first time. They walked through ruins in silence and listened to winds moving over the bones of history. The species the galaxy had buried did not come home roaring. It came home working. That was the final lesson. Humanity was not formidable because it was angrier than everyone else. Plenty of civilizations knew anger. Humanity was formidable because it could turn grief into memory, memory into discipline, and discipline into an answer so exact that empires came apart under the weight of their own choices. The Concord had mistaken silence for death, mercy for weakness, and distance for disappearance. It learned too late that humans had not spent a century hiding from the galaxy. They had spent it remembering. When the restored Hall of Accord reopened under new law, the black-backed chair of Earth was offered back to Secretary Mara Vance in a ceremony broadcast to every inhabited system. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she thanked them, declined the seat, and gave the chamber words that would outlive every regime that had once believed itself eternal. We did not cross 100 years of darkness to sit where cowards sat before us. Keep your chair. Keep your chamber. Keep this memory instead. When you left us to burn, you taught us exactly what kind of galaxy this was. When you touched our survivors, you reminded us. And when you aimed a weapon at our home, you made this simple. She let the silence bite. We were merciful when you thought we were dead.